Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Eddie Jennings from EJSLLC.com. This video is going to be another in my practice session series for the Red Hat Certified Specialist in Containers exam EX188. Before I dive in, I want to thank returning subscribers for watching another video, as well as invite anyone who's watching who hasn't subscribed yet to click that subscribe button. And if you find yourself enjoying the video or find it useful, make sure you click like. Also a reminder, these are my practice sessions for the exam, so I'm going through the objectives, trying to explain them, and maybe try to do some examples of whatever it is the objective is asking for the purpose of doing a self-assessment. My exam is just under 2 weeks away, and this will give me a chance at the end of the video. If I feel confident about the objective, great. If not, then I have a little bit of time to do some preparation before I take my test. These are not intended to be tutorials, nor are they intended to be training materials, but I do try to have the information as accurate as possible. And if you are also preparing for the EX188 exam, you might find some of the things that I do to practice useful and can help you in your own preparation. So we're now in the run multi-container applications with Podman set of objectives, and we're going to be looking at the create application stacks. And this, I had to think a little bit about this set of objectives, and I think these are kind of referring to using a tool called Podman Compose, which is something that is, from what I understand, separate from the Podman project, but it's analogous to Docker Compose, those of whom who have dealt with Docker containers, and it's kind of a way to, for lack of a better phrase, like script the creation of an environment with containers. And the idea behind this is, you have defined in your compose file, you're going to make these containers that have this set of parameters, and you basically run the file and the containers come up, and then you can test your application, do whatever it is, and then you can also use Podman Compose to tear down the environment. So I would imagine it could be something useful, like if you're trying to test for production, but you don't have the capability of truly replicating your production environment. This can kind of give you a mock of that. Now, as far as creating application stacks in particular, this is a bit of a challenge to practice, especially for me as a system administrator. I'm not a developer. I don't write applications and such. But if you look further down in the objectives, it talks about, you may be required to work with one or more pre-written applications, and you're not going to be modifying the actual application code, but you'll probably need to follow whatever documentation to make the application run. And so I think that's really kind of what this refers to. And it's, you may be given an application and you may be told, hey, make containers that will have, the web server and the database server. They need to have the, network between them that they can communicate, and then a network that can have ports being published that the outside world, communicates with the web server, which communicates with the database server. So you can do that manually. That won't be a problem. But I know there is a tool, Podman Compose, that can kind of do this, not necessarily for you, but it's a way to, I guess, automate that a bit. And I'm assuming, because you think about a lot of the Red Hat exams, the objectives are usually built around a particular tool or a set of commands that you need to do. And I would imagine that that's what this is geared toward. I may be wrong. I'll find out in 2 weeks when I take the exam. Obviously, I won't be able to share that because I'll be under NDA and such. The reason why I think it might not be about Podman Compose is just because that's not a part of the official made by, or I'm not sure if Podman is actually made by Red Hat. It's probably, there's an upstream thing that Red Hat's taken over, kind of like how Ansible was, or Ansible is, but it's not like the official part of Podman. However, for my preparation, I figure it might not be a bad idea to try to work with Podman Compose and see if I can do this. So let's go to the terminal. And one difference between Podman Compose and writing a container file for building an image, Podman Compose is in YAML. And those of you that are familiar with Ansible and having to write playbooks, it is basically the same kind of syntax and the declarative configurations and such. Podman Compose is not something that is available like if you install Podman, you're not going to get Podman Compose. You have to install that separately. And what I have learned is Podman Compose is not in the just default repos for RHEL 8 and RHEL 9. And by default repos, I'm talking about Base OS and AppStream. I mean, there's tons of repos if you have a Red Hat subscription that are available to you, but those are the ones that are active by default. It is packaged in the EPEL repos. So I'm not sure if this is going to be on the exam, whether or not it'll already be installed, or if you're expected to install it yourself, and then EPEL's already available. You can install it using PyPI and the pip command, which is what I'm going to do for this. So I'll do pip3 install. I think I have to do install by user. I guess I could use sudo for that, but I know with Python installs, I believe it is frowned upon to do that as root. So we'll do Podman Compose. We'll do the -- user first. Now, one note about this, I know this is true, or at least in my experience, this is true with the PyPI install. I believe it was also true when I installed it using EPEL on actual RHEL 9 machine just to see if it worked. There really isn't much documentation that is provided with this. As a matter of fact, if I were, there's not going to be a man page for Podman Compose because I did this through PyPI. And if I were to do, Podman Compose, if I can spell tonight, -- help, that's, you have that aspect of the documentation. As far as a compose file itself, I'm not aware of any documentation that gets downloaded that's like a sample compose file that shows the syntax. I know there's the compose file spec that you can get. You can take a look at that on GitHub and such with the project. But for your Red Hat exam, you're not going to have access to the outside world for that stuff, which, I mean, granted, you don't always have documentation for everything for your Red Hat exam, but that's something to keep in mind as far as, this might not be on the exam because it's not going to have kind of the normal things you would expect. But again, I could be wrong. That's why I'm kind of preparing for it just in case. Also, never hurts to learn something. So what I'm doing with my little compose file is basically going to be from memory as far as syntax. So we'll see how we do. So let's say I want to make, or rather I want to build an environment that is going to have a web server and a database server. And we'll just use good old Apache and MySQL for this. Let me do Podman search for MySQL. I think I have the Apache image memorized by now. I think I do at least. But I have not done that for MySQL. So let me copy this one here. So we're going to do compose. This can be .yml, .yaml. I think it accepts a couple of, I think you can do like docker-compose and such, and by default Podman Compose will recognize the file. Otherwise, when we run this, you can specify a file. So when you're working with a compose file, you are going to be defining services. And what these services are your containers. And if you think about it, that name sort of makes sense because the idea behind containers is like microservices. You have your little specific container to do this little task, and then if you need more tasks done, then you would have more containers to do that. So the first service that we are going to define is a web server container. This, as far as naming, the way this is going to work when we eventually run this, the naming will be, I think, the directory that you're in underscore this name of the service we're defining will be the name of the container, and I think underscore compose, something like that. If you want, you can specify, I think it's container name. We'll call it web1. We'll see if this works. You specify an image, and nope, I don't want the MySQL image for that. I want I think it's UBI8 HTTPD-24. And let's say, actually, we'll stop with just this. We'll just do the image. We will do for ports. This is where you can map or publish your port. So we'll do 8080 to 8080. That should look familiar. And what you're going to start seeing is if we were to just do Podman run on the command line, you're going to kind of see where this translates to what that configuration would be. So that's all we're going to do for right now. We'll have container name. We actually will specify web1, tell it the image, and we're going to expose that port. We're not going to do anything else with it. Now, for the next service, this is going to be a database, and we're not going to specify container name. We're going to do image. And this we are going to define environment variables, because if you do the MySQL image and you don't specify some variables, it's going to fail for you. And I've learned that just through experience and doing some of my little exercises. So to define environment variables, this is where syntax can get a little confusing. Because remember, it's -e or -e and v, but here you actually specify environment. And then we're basically doing dictionaries of your environment variables. And again, this probably looks very similar to what you deal with in Ansible a good bit. So we know that one of them is one of the ones you can use is MySQL user. I'll set that to my good old foo, MySQL password. Set that to foo, and we have to do the database. Set that to foo. So that should be it. Now, one thing, and this is a bit of a critique. When I was learning some YAML for Ansible and writing my playbooks and such, part of the spec I remember reading, you have to start it with your 3 dashes and end it with the 3 dots. And I try to be a stickler for format and specifications for stuff. However, when I was learning about Podman Compose, all the examples that I found did not have the 3 dashes and 3 dots. And so far, my little tests have worked. So I guess, it's not that strict about it. So just a comment. So we have 2 services, which are basically containers, 1 web server, 1 database. And now let's build this. I'm not going to go through all the different little commands you can do with Podman Compose. And I may or may not review many of them, but the 2 big ones that I think are kind of, or one especially that will be important, is the Podman Compose up, which is basically build whatever it is you have in your compose file. So we're going to do that, Podman Compose up. If we wanted to, we could -f specify the file. Otherwise, it will look for a compose file in your directory, and we're going to do -d afterward. If you do it before, then it'll complain, but -d afterward to start the containers in a detached state. Actually, before I do that, let me clear my screen, and then we'll do this. That way we can see all of the output. So Podman Compose up and -d. Let's see what happens. So notice while this is pulling down the image, basically this is translating what's in your compose file to a Podman run command. See, we have the name, Eddie Web Server 1. That's actually kind of interesting because I thought container name would have been something different. -d, we had that. Specifying some labels, which that's just more metadata. I'll talk about the network in just a moment. There is our Podman run for the database, and we see the environment variables there that were made, and both had exit code 0. Let's clear our screen here, Podman PS, and we see that they are both up. And container name apparently did not work because it has Eddie Web Server 1. This is why I was talking about the convention that Podman Compose will use if you don't specify stuff. It'll be the directory you're in, and my current directory is home Eddie database, and then actually an underscore. I was wrong. I thought it was going to be compose. Now, one thing to note, if I were to do Podman network ls, there is a network, unless you actually it might not be an unless you specify. I believe a default network that connects all of the containers is always going to be made if you do your Podman Compose. And this will be a network, unlike the default network that comes with Podman that doesn't have DNS enabled. If I were to do Podman network inspect eddy default, this actually is going to have DNS enabled. So therefore, the little built-in DNS that's within Podman will allow you to have the name resolution for your containers. And so now I have, in theory, a functioning environment as far as I have my web server and my database server. Now, of course, they aren't really going to be able to talk to each other much right now because I guess I could have built images and installed ping on them, or install whatever the package is that we would need for ping and test doing that. I might do that in a separate video. But the point being, this can be used to build your, going back to the objective list, you create an application stack, and this application stack is part of LAMP. We have the Apache part, the MySQL part. I'm sure PHP is probably installed on this, and we just and it's on Linux. So there we go. Now to tear this down, we can do Podman Compose down. And it will not only stop the items, but it will actually remove the containers themselves. So if I do Podman PSA, there are no containers. I think there may be a start and a stop. Let's bring our stuff up again. Oh, one thing to note. Podman Network LS. The Podman Compose little default network is there. And actually, while we're in here, did I misspell something? Container. Oh, container. I'm surprised that didn't error out, because I figured it would say, "Hey, this is an invalid thing." So instead of it may have shown an error, but then continued. Now it should be as intended. So clear our screen. Podman up -D. Oh, Podman Compose up -D. Now we see the name as intended. And notice this doesn't take nearly as long because the image has already been downloaded. So Podman PS-A, and we see our web server was up. Now let's look Podman Compose -help. I think there was a start and a stop. Oh, one thing, yeah, that is one thing. You can start and stop, specific services or specific containers. So let's try that. So we'll do Podman Compose stop web 1. And I assume that it is, that makes sense. It's complaining about that as a missing service, because that is not the name of the service. That was the name I gave to the container. So let me do head on my compose file. So the name of the service is web server. That makes sense. Podman Compose stop web server. And we see now that particular container is exited. I wonder if there's a Podman Compose start -A to do everything. Nope, there is not. Doesn't look it, at least anyway. Let's do Podman Compose start help. That might give us some ideas. Nope, looks like we have to specify the services. Now, if you use Podman Compose a lot and know a little shortcut to do everything, then by all means mention that. And again, this tool might not actually be on the exam. And if it is, great, I have an idea of how to use it. If not, well, I've learned another tool. And remember, the point of the certification is to gain the skills. And if you get the certification at the end, that's added bonus, right? So we'll start web server, all right, and those containers should be back. And I do know with Podman down, there's an option, I think it's -V maybe. So Podman Compose down help. Yeah, -V. In another video, I'm going to talk about volumes, and I think I'm going to do this set of objectives kind of from the perspective of Podman Compose in addition to doing things without Podman Compose. And so we'll talk about the volumes. One thing to note, at least from what I have learned, you can do the -V and it will get rid of volumes that are made for Podman Compose, but the Podman Compose down, but the network that is made is going to persist. If I wanted to get rid of network ls, if I wanted to get rid of this network, I would have to do Podman network remove. Nope. Dash help to the rescue. RM. I feel kind of dumb for not remembering that. Podman network RM and then eddy default, and that will get rid of that that network. If I clear Podman network ls, now it's gone. All you have is the default Podman network. So I'm not 100% sure, again, if this tool is actually going to be on the exam, but it seems like one that would be related to this. And the idea of creating the application stacks, I guess another thing you could do would be write a bash script that is basically doing Podman run, which that's effectively what Podman Compose is doing, just with far more bells and whistles to be able to specify. And I guess, yeah, technically we worked with environment variables. I may or may not do another video for that because we did that with the MySQL container. So I think as far as understanding what creating application stacks means, I'm pretty well set for that for the exam. So hopefully you found the video useful. If you did, make sure you click like. Also, if you have not subscribed to the channel yet, make sure you do click the subscribe button. And I want to thank returning subscribers for watching another video. And for everyone, thanks for your time, and I'll see you the next time.